History is a really complicated subject in school, right? It's boring. Like it's I don't know if it's the teacher's fault or the schools. I don't want to put blame on anyone, but it's a really complicated subject for a lot of people. For me, not so much. I enjoy it, but of course, school is never fun. And now that you grow up, become an adult, I just sort of I don't know. I've really gained a lot of deep appreciation for history, and of course, that includes Mexican history, which is really fascinating. So if you don't know Mexican history, prepare because
For
this is gonna be
creators,
good.
by
I hope.
creators. Mystery. That is the word you'd use most often when studying ancient pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. Not because we don't know what happened, but more because we don't know why it stopped happening. The oldest American writing system, the Mayan script, is suspiciously quiet about events leading up to the fall of great civilizations. Is this because of ignorance or neglect? Or, more morbidly, because dire circumstances prevented records from even being made in the first place? We just don't know. Mystery. If you were going to start a civilization on the American continent, southern Mexico would not be a bad place to start. Mesoamerica was a warmer and more temperate congregation point for the continent's new migrants, Paleo-Indians, arriving over the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia. To build a civilization, you need four things: people, a stable climate, access to water, and a staple food crop. These secret ingredients were bountiful in the south: lush rivers, domesticated maize plants, only the occasional drought, and soon enough, the Olmecs. With access to some of
Yeah.
America's most virulent crops, three important cities emerged on three river systems. Civilization was born. Along with it came culture and trade. It's a lot easier to pass down knowledge if you all live in one place. The Olmecs are considered the mother civilization of all Central America for good reason, spreading their way further outward while trading with every other pre-Columbian civilization that would follow.
Yeah, right.
Mysteriously, the Olmecs eventually faded from their prominence, perhaps due to their rivers silting up. But the hard work was already done, and knowledge had spread all the way down those trade routes.
Nice intro. Kudos, bro. That's a nice
It is
intro.
not surprising to see the various civilizations that sprang up on those old trade routes. The Maya, who had existed for centuries in the Guatemalan highlands, had descended into Yucatan for trade, and had learned a thing or two about this whole new civilization thing. But what made them particularly successful was their abundant access to limestone, which is not only great for building cities that can endure all manner of erosion and earthquakes, but also great for filtering clean drinking water in underground caves. The first major power in the region, Kaminali-Juyu, rose up to prominence for its control of the obsidian trade. From there, the Maya would spread further into the Petén Basin and then into Yucatan, building from limestone as they went. And then, all of a sudden, nothing. Abandoned cities, defunct trade networks, and derelict monuments. The mysterious pre-classical Mayan collapse. Archaeologists have been scratching their heads about what led to this downfall. Was it war? Was it famine? We just don't know. There's nothing written about it, nothing we have records of anyway, and even less in the way of archaeological findings, which only
Yeah,
get
so basically, yeah, this is very weird. This is a very weird period of Mexican history, especially like the first, uh, uh the first, uh, I don't know how to say it. Uh, the first pieces of Mexican history are very rare because the Olmecs, we don't know what happened to them. The pre-classical Mayans, we don't know what happened to them. Maybe disease, maybe war, maybe a mixture of both, natural disaster. We just don't know. So yeah, like he said, it's a mystery because we don't know what happened, and I don't know. I don't know if we ever will. But one thing is for sure, it was the mecca of civilization. Especially, Mexico is a big place, and especially the focus is on like central and southern Mexico because that's really where the action happened. And Mexico's generally divided by three regions. So for this, the pre-Spaniard Mexican history, basically with the Native Americans, it's divided into three because a lot of tribes in the north are very similar to the tribes in the U.S. states of Arizona, New Mexico, right? I don't know if they're the Navajo or the Cherokee, but they're very similar. They were very nomadic tribes, While these were established civilizations that established themselves along rivers, so like the Indus River Valley, or like the Chinese, what's the Yellow River? I'm not entirely sure. The Nile, right? Egypt. So yeah, these civilizations I think are fairly comparable to those in Egypt and those in Mesopotamia and the Indus River Valley. I think you can see the difference, the similarities in the invention of farming and starting to use a writing script and blah blah blah. I'm not an expert in history though, so.
It's more confusing with what comes after.
Oh God.
Hoy en día puedes
Yeah,
producir
yeah. Shut
música
the
de
fuck up,
calidad.
dude.
The classical Mayan period is probably the one you're most familiar with. Most of their scientific achievements comes from this era, including the long count calendar, which
By the way, if you guys wanna watch why do I look down in my pants, it's because this little girl is down there, the most masculine dog you'll ever meet, right? But I'm gonna let her go. I don't know if you can see them. They're right there. The doggos. Anyway, let's continue.
caused a bit of a stir back in 2012 for its supposed prediction of the end of the world. But there is no way
That's the guy from the 2012 movie. If you watch the 2012 movie, you understand the reference.
evidence that the Maya ever actually, thought this. This was both the most prosperous period and the one we know most about, with cities and monuments recording dates and events using their calendars, and science and engineering feats advancing their understanding of the natural world. Power returned
pretty good.
in the form of powerful city-states, not much unlike classical Greece, or modern Monaco, I guess? City-states are a lot rarer these days. But anyway, as you may expect, having a
whole
whole bunch of
Roman
cities in one area competing for resources is kind of a recipe for disaster in the long run, and these Mayan ones were no exception. A great example of this was the war between its two most powerful cities, Tikal and Calakmul, a conflict which has its origins in the invasion and subsequent installation of a new dynasty in Tikal by the great city of Teotihuacan. Wait, who the heck are these guys? Welcome to yet another one of Mesoamerica's great mysteries. Teotihuacan was an absolutely massive city all the way over here in the Valley of Mexico. Its people, as well as who built it, is unfortunately lost to time, but at its peak, for about 5 centuries, it ruled the trade between the vibrant civilizations of the south and the nomads of the north. And with such power and grandiosity, they were often meddling in the affairs of cities all over Central America. Their hostile takeover of the throne of Tikal would so destabilize the geopolitics of the region that the aforementioned war would dominate the later part of the classic Maya life for 3 centuries. And then, almost out of nowhere, again, nothing. Cities abandoned and trade ceasing, similar to the situation that happened before. The classical Mayan collapse is one of the greatest mysteries of the historical and archaeological world. Political and mercantile power simply vanished without any obvious historical culprit. Theories range as to what caused this, the constant warring probably didn't help, but equally perplexing is that even Teotihuacan itself had collapsed earlier, with evidence of riots and looting against the ruling class. Did whatever caused the great city's inhabitants to rise up against their rulers also eventually lead to the classical Mayan collapse? Who knows? What we do know is that the post-classic period would never rise up to the Maya's former glory, and would remain as a warlike, infighting civilization until its own collapse at the hands of the Spanish. But now let's return to central Mexico for a moment. What became of the ruins of Teotihuacan? Well, as you'd imagine, these guys left one pretty big power vacuum, and with such a prosperous area, it wasn't long before one of their more militarized subjects, the Toltecs, filled the void. But more of a conquering type than a ruling type, it is really their descendant civilizations that become important. The Aztecs. The Aztecs actually came comparatively late to the pre-Columbian game, considering how powerful they were, but how they actually started was an alliance of 3 former Toltec cities, the most important of which was Tenochtitlan. And it is here we finally get a great founding myth with a unique Mexican flavor. The story goes that the Mexicas people
is it the
built their
story of
city
the
on an
flag?
island after they had a prophecy of an eagle with a snake landing on a cactus there. Not deterred with the
Yeah, so if you were wondering, why the flag of Mexico is kind of weird, it's because of that. It's because of this legend or this myth or like yeah, this myth that they were looking, the god or the god they believed in, was telling them that the perfect place to build the city was where they saw a an eagle eating a snake on a cactus or a cacti. I don't know how you say it. So, story goes that they were looking for this place and suddenly found it. So, if you wonder why the Mexican flag has that, it's not because we're very artsy or very creative. It's because this is a very, very ancient myth. And it's important because that's the place where Mexico City is, Lake Texcoco, right here. This is where Mexico City is built, which is why it sinks and earthquakes are so bad. But that's a topic for another story. But yeah, it is really interesting. I don't know. I don't think it really happened though, because when have you ever saw an eagle eating a snake on a cacti? Right? It doesn't really happen. But it's nice. It's a very Mexican thing, and it's probably the first thing you learn in school. About the flag and what does it mean and what does it represent. And the colors, I think the white stands for peace, the green stands for liberty, and the red obviously stands for blood. The blood of the ones who fought for the country, right? Which that's the case in a lot of places, but
Prospect of drowning, the Mexicas built an explosively massive city, not only easy to defend, but also to supply with food and water from the lake that surrounded it. The so-called Triple Alliance between Tenochtitlan and its neighbors would form what we
now that I'm seeing these names, a lot of places in Mexico City are called, these are regions in Mexico City, Tlacopan, I don't know about this one, but a lot of places in Mexico City, if you go as a tourist, you'll find that these are very similar to a lot of the places in Mexico City.
So-called Triple Alliance between Tenochtitlan and its neighbors would form what we now know as the Aztec Empire, which is quickly able to conquer much of the former Toltec lands. And yes, they are also known for their extensive practice of human sacrifice. Because the idea was that the gods blessed them when given human blood. Kinda hard to argue that when you're the most powerful empire on the continent at the time. And one way they captured slaves for human sacrifice was through ritual warfare, the so-called Flower Wars. The Aztecs have earned their place firmly within the Mexican national consciousness, thanks in large part to them being the last great formidable empire in North America when the Spanish arrived. Now, I've used the term pre-Columbian a lot during this video, and that's not because the famous sailor Christopher Columbus ever actually went to Mexico, but rather refers to an event called the Columbian Exchange. The Eastern Hemisphere's discovery of this new world, which would eventually become known as America, was massively important to history. Hard to overstate, really. The period was the largest cultural, religious, and economic exchange the world has ever known, fundamentally and irrevocably changing the trajectory of both the old world and the new. Concurrent to this exchange was conquest. If you were going to pick a European nation to discover and then begin the conquest of Central America with the least amount of chaos, you probably wouldn't want to have picked 16th century Spain. They were, after all, at the end of the Reconquista, a centuries-long process of expelling Muslims, Jews, practitioners of paganism and witchcraft from Iberia, backed by the Catholic Church. At the same time, they were increasingly hungry to gain wealth previously controlled by the Muslims, and they had just discovered a previously unknown landmass to the west, so it seemed like the perfect place to start. Driven by tales of golden cities and swathes of people to convert to Christianity, early colonizers of Central America were conquerors, so-called conquistadors, such as the famous Hernan Cortez. Cleverly allying himself with various cities that the Aztecs had conquered, Cortez destroyed Tenochtitlan, and upon its ruins would build a new city.
Well, it's not quite like that. I mean, he struggled a little bit. And I guess you could understand. I mean, moving an army from Spain to Mexico is not an easy task, especially by 1521, right? It's not an easy thing to do. So it wasn't that easy for him to take Mexico City or Tenochtitlan, but he used the same principle as the Romans, right? Sort of divide and conquer, and he. Under the Aztecs, there were a lot of people who were pretty angry, because you have these guys who are sacrificing your wives and they're conquering all this territory. So then they come the Spaniards were like, hey, we can end these guys. And the people here in Mexico thought that the Spaniards were gods because of they had rifles, and people were like, well, what is that? Rifles. They had horses, they had dogs, and they really thought these people were not all Indians. And there's actually a really cool mini series about the whole thing on Amazon Prime, at least here in Mexico. I don't know if it's in the US. It's called Cortez, and you can watch it, and it basically explains literally this: how the Spaniards arrived and how they communicated with the natives and how they would eventually lead to conquer Tenochtitlan, which would be the I don't know, the most important Spanish possession. Peru was kind of a big deal as well, but it definitely changed history for both Spain and Mexico.
Mexico, meaning place of the Mexicas. The viceroyalty of New Spain would be the new power in the region. Merchants, conquistadors, explorers, and pirates soon arrived in the thousands to this new colony, many enslaving the natives in a system called the encomienda. Along with them came missionaries and religious zealots with the goal of converting the heathens from what they perceived to be their barbaric pagan religion, burning their historical and scientific writings, fearing them as being works of the devil. The Spanish conquests were a particularly devastating period for Mexico. The Maya, for example, were weak and disunited and should have been easy pickings, but they took decades to conquer. Fighting in dense jungle in guerrilla warfare, ambushing the Spanish and laying complicated booby traps,
like
forever
Vietnam.
fueling the idea that the New World was a barbaric and uncivilized place. The real war, however, was not against the Spanish, but against diseases. Measles, influenza, typhoid, yellow fever, and especially smallpox. Amerindian peoples of the New World had no exposure to these diseases before the Columbian Exchange. Combining these epidemics with asymmetric warfare against the more advanced weaponry and technology of the Europeans, modern estimates vary on the death rate of these conquests, some ranging as high as 90%. To the north were the Chichimeca, a confederation of nomadic Indians who were so powerful that the Spanish fought the longest and most expensive war of their entire colonial venture, trying to subjugate them, being defeated time and time again before eventually resorting to diplomacy. But why were the Spanish willing to compromise? Silver. Many of the most prominent conquistadors were motivated by wealth, and when the Aztec gold turned out to be not quite as bountiful as expected, explorers went in search of minerals elsewhere, and they found the jackpot in Zacatecas. Silver flooded the market from
And this is usually why the northern states in Mexico have like a wider population. The people are a lot wider than they are in the south, because there weren't a lot of Native Americans and a lot of Spaniards immigrated in the looks of wealth. And yeah, disease was the game changer because it killed millions. So of course war is a lot easier when your enemy is fighting smallpox and all of these diseases. So yeah,
from this mine, making colonizers and the Spanish rich
sure.
beyond measure. New Spain's silver production was rivaled only by Peru, and so bountiful that the inflation rate would not only flood the international market, but also bring about the temporary economic collapse of both New Spain and even China. How's that for a weird achievement? Besides silver and cash crops, the Spanish Main, as it was known, also dealt in other less savory trade: slaves. Although relatively few African slaves ended up in Mexico itself, the wealth created by those silver mines has a lot to do with the demand increase for these West African captives, and so the transatlantic slave trade was born. Like elsewhere in Latin America, New Spain enforced a strict caste system which defined a social hierarchy on racial grounds, with Spaniards at the top, followed by Spaniards born in New Spain, then mixed race, and finally, the lowest of them all, Native American Indians. Let's not mince words here. This was a way of controlling people, making it harder for the disenfranchised to succeed in society and also keeping their elites loyal and happy. It is in this strange new geopolitical landscape that the defining characteristics formed of what it meant to be Mexican, or what it eventually meant anyway, and perhaps nothing was more important than the identity of being Catholic. Catholicism was already immensely important to the Spaniards, But to make it a truly Mexican religion, it would need to appeal to everyone else, and so it would be by the miraculous apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe, perhaps no greater symbol of Mexico's devout. The image, which appeared to an Aztec named Juan Diego, was interpreted as a Christian incarnation of the goddess Tenochtitlan, and to the Spaniards as a native incarnation of the Virgin Mary. As a mestizo, she was half Spaniard, half native, and so the lady would forever symbolize the unity of these two races,
Wow, I
and the
actually
faith
didn't
would
hear
spread
the
throughout
whole
the
story.
land, blending Christian beliefs with American ones, forming a truly unique flavor of Christianity, even blending long-practiced traditions of venerating the dead with Hallowtide to form
Dia de
what would become
Muertos,
known
for
as
sure.
Dia de Muertos, the Day of the Dead. In fact, cultural blending in essence is what makes Mexico what it is today. Everything from food, music, the aforementioned religion, alcohol, and even its people is a blend of
Yeah,
Spanish
everything.
and Amerindian influence.
I've always said that here in Mexico we're a blend of European and Native American culture, similar to any other places, but I think in Mexico it's a lot heavier because 80% of the people in Mexico are mixed race, but it's probably we're probably the largest mixed race nation in the world, and so I think that's why it's so important to mention it.
Influences. Today, Mexico is the largest mixed-race nation in the world, with more than 80% of its citizens belonging to the mestizo classification. Although life
That is crazy. That's literally what I just said, literally word by word.
was already hard in New Spain due to the economic collapse, it was the new Spanish monarchy, the Bourbons, reforming the colony that really made life more difficult.
Oh, come on.
The Bourbon reforms aimed to boost the production and exports in the New World and to make the colony more economically dependent on Spain itself. And in a time when mestizos and criollos were the vast majority of the population, it's not hard to see that the elite peninsulares were the only ones who really benefited from this. The growing discontent was also taking place during the Enlightenment, when all sorts of power dynamics were being scrutinized, so it makes sense that revolution was soon on the doorstep. All it needed was a catalyst, which would come, confusingly, in the form of the French. When Napoleon invaded Spain, he basically threw centuries of political establishment out the window, putting his brother on the throne and making all manner of a mess in Spain's colonies, who really didn't know how to react. When instability arrives in long-established power dynamics, that is usually when revolutions happen, and with New Spain, it is no different. Peninsulares just wanted the old Bourbon king back, the Criollos just wanted to get rid of the Peninsulares, and the Mestizos just wanted to get rid of both the Peninsulares and the Criollos because they couldn't really tell the difference anyway. Soon the whole nation was up in arms with competing aims that changed over time, but toward the end of the uprising it was all gung-ho for independence. Getting all the factions to agree what they were fighting for was the real challenge, however, and would only be duct taped together in a compromise called the Three Guarantees. Mexico would be founded on the principles of unity, independence from Spain, and Catholicism. The war lasted 11 years, fought not only with Napoleonic Spain but also the restored Bourbons. The new nation would be named after their Aztec ancestors, upon which they had built their capital city. But the Aztecs never called themselves Aztecs, but rather Mexicas, and their land was Mexico. But history tends to call this era the first Mexican Empire because 1. It had an emperor, and 2. It ruled much of what we call Central America as well. And putting it diplomatically, the empire came to an end after just 2 years, mostly because factions who supported one of the Three Guarantees always just kind of felt that they didn't much care for the other two beyond, winning a war, and so the whole thing kind of just fell apart because nation building is hard. So hard, in fact, that the next century is what you would call a very messy time. If mystery
Very.
is a great word for pre-Columbian Mexico, then instability would be the word for post-independence.
Yeah, for
Split into two factions, the liberals and the conservatives constantly overthrowing one another. Central America.
Oh man, I'm
politely
having PTSD of all my history classes because this period is really hard. It's really confusing. A lot of things happen between within 50 years. Things in Mexico get super complex, and there's so many wars, and there's so many factions, and there's so many government overthrowing the last government, and it's really a mess. This is the messiest time in Mexican history, which is saying something, you know. I guess Mexico has always been a little bit unstable. But yeah, basically you got liberals and conservatives, and they're fighting for power, and ones are very religious, and yeah, they even have like a soft spot for the monarchy. Uh, and then there's the liberals, which they are liberals and they want more freedom and more of a secular state, and yeah, they basically fought like a gazillion years.
Opted out in 1823. Texas impolitely opted out in 1835. When the Second Mexican Republic came to power, they wanted Texas back, which was a bit hard for them to do when the United States annexed it in 1845.
You know, a lot of Mexicans get a little bit touchy. Well, no, they don't get touchy. They don't really care, but that's probably like the biggest national shame, or sort of historical shame. You know, in Mexico, people feel proud about their history, and they feel proud about all the wars we fought, and the independence, and the Aztecs, right? The sort of great warrior culture, and yeah, the defeat in the hands of the United States, which was a humiliating defeat, is probably the biggest national scar there is, because not only we lost the war, but we lost half the territory we had, and gold would be soon discovered in California, which which put some salt on the wound, and you know, oil right now. Texas is very oil rich, so it kind of hurts, right? There's a wound there, and yeah, people feel bad about it. You know, they are always saying, "Oh, if we had Texas, then we would be like a global superpower," and California too.
5. Mexico would fight a devastating war with the US, losing not only Texas, but nearly half of their territory in the process, which, as you can imagine, didn't really help with stability. So, if you've ever wondered why this half of America has so many Spanish names, now you know better. Sharing the blame for Mexico's instability, though, would be an early...
Look at the attention to detail. Yeah, Santa Anna, he lost a leg in the war, if you didn't know, so that's why it says "Rip, here lies my leg," because he lost it. And I think his leg was actually buried. Like, I think you can even go visit it. I don't know. Like, you can visit, like actually visit the place where his leg is buried. He was buried with his right leg. Okay, yeah. He had the other amputated after being wounded during an 1838 battle with French forces, blah, 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 blah. There's even videos about it. The sad saga of Santa Anna's leg. That'd be interesting to watch, honestly. But yeah, we're not there.
Charismatic leader named Lopez de Santa Anna, serving as president a whopping 12 times as an autocrat, deeply unpopular for losing
probably the most hated man in Mexican history,
the war, and ceding so much land to America. He was exiled in 1855. The same year, a radical new set of changes called the Liberal Reform came into place, which, as you might guess with a name like that, ruffled more than a few conservative feathers, which began the Reform War. Only with the help of the United States were the liberals under Benito Juarez able to push the conservatives back. I really wish I had more time to talk about this era, but the main thing to take away here is that the conservative elites continue to be a problem in Mexico, quietly waiting for an opportunity to strike and come back to power. And that opportunity, rather confusingly again, was French. Turns out that wars are pretty expensive, and Mexico was beginning to rack up something of a significant debt, especially with France. France also saw a really good opportunity to work with the conservative monarchists to bring back the Mexican Empire, so as to counteract the influence of the growing United States. Fair enough, really. And so began the second French intervention in Mexico, because believe it or not, they'd actually briefly done this before, back in 1938 during the Pastry War. Good name, by the way. There's nothing quite like a foreign enemy to rally the country together. After briefly declaring the Second Mexican Empire, the French were soon driven out. One of the most famous legacies of the war was the Battle of Puebla, where on the 5th of May, or Cinco de Mayo, the numerically
The
inferior
almighty
and
Cinco de
outgunned
Mayo.
Mexican army defeated the French, providing a huge morale boost to the nation,
Yep.
especially for the liberals who had defended the country
People here feel very proud about this battle. And I particularly know about this because I am from this part originally. I am from Puebla, the state of Puebla, and the city of Puebla. So it's a very celebrated holiday here. Internationally, this is our most famous holiday. You know, Cinco de Mayo in the U.S. is sort of celebrated as I guess either Mexico's independence or a Hispanic Day. I don't know. I don't really know what's the deal with that. But here, nobody really celebrates it that much, to be honest. I mean, people celebrate 15th of September, which is our Independence Day. But the Cinco de Mayo here is not really that big of a deal. But still, people feel proud about talk about proud moments in history. Defeating the French army with an inferior army that was Mexico. That was a sort of a big deal. Of course, still the French were a big pain in the ass. But we managed to score a win.
country rather than the
scored the
conservatives who had supported the French. But before anyone really had time to bask in this great victory, a general named Porfirio Diaz led a coup against the president in 1876, mainly because he was against the practice of presidents serving more than one term. Just by the way, he served 7 terms himself. Porfirio was something of a dictator and established order with an iron fist, running unopposed in a bid to provide some stability for Mexico to encourage foreign investment. And for all intents and purposes, the country did modernize and the economy did start doing really well, if by that you mean that the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, but so what else is new? Unfortunately, Porfirio hadn't really made a plan for a world without Porfirio, and after failing to step down as promised in 1910 and jailing his opponent, the country had had enough. Soon, it was revolution. Diaz was voted out in favor of one Francisco Madero, but to a nation in absolute chaos. Madero managed to be unpopular with both the left, who thought he was too conservative, and the right, who thought he was too liberal, leading to his own ousting and assassination during the 10 tragic days. Victorio Huerta, who had led the coup, had taken it too far. The country wanted Madero out of office, but murder they could not stand by. Huerta was himself ousted by the revolutionaries during the First World War, and now with no president and large bands of armed revolutionaries roaming the countryside, it's not hard to guess what came next. The Mexican Civil War. With 1.5 million lives lost, 1 in 10 of the total population,
Yeah,
the
that was
devastating
huge.
war concluded with the constitutionalist faction of Venustiano Carranza being victorious. But stability was not a luxury Mexico would enjoy for long. President after president was assassinated in the 1920s before Plutarco Calles came to power, enraged by what he believed to be the true root of Mexico's problems: Catholics. Another war would erupt with Mexico's
Another one,
devout
yes.
Cristeros, the armies of Christ seeking religious freedom. The political party established by these revolutionary presidents, by the way, would remain in power in Mexico until the year 2000, to give you something of an insight into the rampant instability that characterized Mexico's 20th century. Mexico today still has its problems, although they have come very far. The situation in Latin American countries provides an interesting insight into understanding the post-colonial world. We tend to think of the decolonization timeline as America got it first, Africa and Asia got it last, and all other countries got it somewhere in between. Where in that timeline it happened really did matter in forming the nations we see today. Lots of major world events happened in this timeline, each with its own influence on the world. Mexico was still struggling with the deeply entrenched political status quo of their Spanish rulers during their independence movement, providing a petri dish for class warfare. Class warfare is only exacerbated in times of intellectual proliferation, such as during the Enlightenment, which, if well armed, will almost always escalate to war. Wars fought not only on the battlefield, but also in people's minds. Conservatives and liberals disagreed on the fundamental way to see the world, who they were, who they are now, and who they want to be. And history, or the romantic idea of history, has arguments to support either side at either time. Conservatives had after all benefited from the land policies of the Spanish, and the liberals had benefited by the intervention of foreign powers. Extra points for fighting the French. Foreign intervention. Where have we heard that story before? If Mexico's history teaches us anything above all else, it's that change is sometimes painfully slow, and what changes do happen don't necessarily benefit everyone, and sometimes if you want that change bad enough, you would overthrow the neighboring city, revolt against the foreign overlords, or take out political opponents, whether you stand to benefit or not. The most challenging question I've had to ask myself when writing this video was, in the Western world, when did we stop thinking of stability as a luxury? Because my intuition says Mexico probably never did. The conquistadors have been subjected to centuries of propaganda called the Black Legend, and it is important to understand that the propagators were mostly Spain's rivals, the British. But dismissing these conquistadors' actions as simple exaggeration or myth is equally problematic. I've shared a series called The Butterfly Effect on this channel quite a few times because it really is just a stunning series. With gorgeous animations and production quality, the episode on Hernan Cortés is a great way to understanding the beginning of the colonial era in Mexico. Hernan Cortés is a very controversial figure, not only in Mexican history, but arguably the world, and it is important for us to understand the less savory periods for intellectual honesty. You can watch this series or any other on CuriosityStream's thousands of documentaries and titles when you head to CuriosityStream.